Taiwan's economic growth since the 20th century has always been attributed to the government's progressive economic policies and commitment to industrialization. These gave birth to companies like Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, which now contributes massively into Taiwan's economy. Moreover, Taiwan's gross domestic product, GDP per capita, also stands as one of the highest in the entire Asian continent. Just take a look at the GDP per capita data published by the Madison Project database in 2023. You can see the astronomical rise of Taiwan's GDP per capita. It is even far more surprising when you compare it to neighboring countries like Japan and South Korea, two Asian economic tigers. Yet, the data provided by the Madison Project database, which also takes into account inflation and cost of living, shows how far Taiwan really is. This economic growth is, as we just mentioned, largely because of the government of Taiwan. But that isn't really the entire story. It is true that the government had a big impact on the overall economy, but there's also another major player in this story, the United States. The US has continuously been a major economic partner of Taiwan since the Second World War. They have provided aid in the form of loans, grants, technical cooperation to even military assistance, and national defense construction initiatives. When the US helped Taiwan over the years, they were no mere small millions of dollars. They were massive, accounting for billions and billions of dollars. Even until today, the current US government administration of Joe Biden has effectively been providing help to Taiwan. So, just how big of an impact has this been to Taiwan's economy? Well, let's first start at the very beginning. Just after World War II, the US immediately recognized Taiwan's strategic importance within the Asia-Pacific region, especially with the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950. At this time, Taiwan was in a precarious position, economically underdeveloped, politically unstable, and highly vulnerable to communist influence. To counter the spread of communism and reinforce its regional security, the US provided Taiwan with substantial economic and military assistance, marking the beginning of a long-term partnership. Here's a graph showing the economic and military assistance of the US to Taiwan from 1950 to 1967. In every time frame, the US has provided hundreds of millions of dollars, with the entirety of it totaling over $2.3 billion in military assistance and $1.58 billion in economic assistance. This might not seem a lot in today's figures. But what you should know is that during the 1950 to 1967, Taiwan's accumulated national GDP at that time was just $34.5 billion, and the US aid for this period accounted for over 12% of the country's nominal GDP. For a foreign country to account for Taiwan's 12% of GDP means that US aid had a profound influence on Taiwan's economic stability and growth during these years. Let's take a look at Taiwan's GDP per capita over these years. Taiwan's GDP per capita has excelled compared to most East and Southeast Asian nations, as evident by the same database. But this is just a summarized overview, of course. We still need to go into more detail to truly appreciate how important these aids were. Let's divide these into two sections, military aid and economic aid, and we'll start with military aid. Military aid is, arguably, far more important than the economic aid provided to Taiwan. Why? Well, after the Second World War, the Republic of China, ROC government, retreated to Taiwan. From there on, Taiwan needs security in a volatile region. There were fears about communism expansion, and the US did not want Taiwan to fall into such hands. Therefore, the US had established a containment line that included Taiwan as a key defensive post. The aid provided not only bolstered Taiwan's defense capabilities, but also acted as a stabilizing force that enabled the island to focus on economic growth and social development without the looming threat of invasion or internal unrest. Between 1950 and 1965, the US provided over $2.4 billion in military aid to Taiwan, making up around 60% of total US assistance during this period. These helped create defense infrastructures. For instance, the Shulinku Air Station and the Taipei Air Station housed the US military and were continuously upgraded when the US used them. These, and among other defense infrastructures, provided Taiwan with a reliable defense network and reduced the likelihood of a successful assault from adversaries. On top of that, US military support was also not just about material assistance. It also had a psychological impact on both Taiwan and its adversaries. For Taiwan, the presence of American military advisors and the continuous supply of military resources reinforced the island's sense of security. This confidence in its defense capacity allowed the government to redirect resources that might otherwise have been spent on military build-up toward economic and social programs instead. For mainland China, the US's visible commitment to Taiwan's security acted as a powerful deterrent. Any aggressive moves by China would risk direct conflict with the United States, a factor that contributed to the maintenance of an uneasy peace across the Taiwan Strait throughout the Cold War. This strategic ambiguity regarding the extent of US intervention if Taiwan were attacked provided enough deterrence to keep the peace without escalating tensions into open conflict. Additionally, and as we just mentioned, Taiwan's government's reliance on the US for defense meant that rather than wasting money on building up a domestic military force, they could instead use those funds for programs that stimulated economic growth. For instance, one of the key reasons why Taiwan is an industrial powerhouse today is because the government had a lot of money to fund this industry, because they did not need to spend too much on their military. Now, let's talk about the economic aid, which is also crucial. Economic aid is simple to understand. US aid helped build infrastructures across Taiwan. They helped power the nation's energy sector, and ports and trades. But amongst the most important places where economic aid has become vital is probably in their agriculture. In the early 1950s, Taiwan's economy was largely agrarian, and much of the population depended on agriculture for their livelihoods. Recognizing the need for food security and rural development, the US devoted a significant portion of economic aid to modernizing Taiwan's agricultural sector. The US introduced modern farming techniques, including improved irrigation systems, high-yield crop varieties, and chemical fertilizers. These advancements led to substantial increases in productivity, allowing Taiwan to not only achieve self-sufficiency in food, but also to generate a surplus for export. Here's a graph of Taiwan's exports from 1960 and 1965. These agricultural products, which helped generate export revenues, laid the foundation for what's to come: electronic products. As evident by the graph, agricultural exports slowed and were overtaken by the electronics and electrical sector. Another significant factor here is land reforms. Economic aid supported Taiwan's land reform initiatives, which aimed to redistribute land to tenant farmers and reduce the power of large landowners. These reforms were pivotal in reducing rural poverty and promoting social stability. By empowering farmers with ownership, land reform boosted agricultural productivity and generated disposable income, which fueled demand for manufactured goods, contributing to Taiwan's economic growth in multiple sectors. Another important factor in economic aid was trade. Trade is when a country imports and exports products and services. The dynamics of trade is simple. When Taiwan buys something from the US, they have to pay it in US dollars, and when they sell something to the US, they will receive US dollars. But the problem is, Taiwan can't print the US dollar. That means its resources were limited in buying overseas goods. But that wasn't a problem. Taiwan kept important goods and services, and a lot of their imports weren't really financed by their own country, but rather US economic aid. From 1950 to 1970, US economic aid effectively covered about 78.5% of Taiwan's total trade deficit. This aid was not merely a cash infusion, but a targeted financial solution that allowed Taiwan to purchase the necessary imports without depleting its limited foreign currency reserves. The economic impact is easy to see here. US aid basically acted as a buffer. This freed Taiwan from the constraints of a foreign exchange shortage. Taiwan could allocate more resources toward building industries with high export potential, such as textiles, consumer goods, and electronics. Furthermore, Taiwan's trade deficit could have posed a severe threat to its economic stability, risking inflation and currency devaluation. However, by financing imports, US aid stabilized Taiwan's balance of payments. This helped Taiwan avoid excessive foreign debt, which would have otherwise been necessary to cover the shortfall. By avoiding this debt trap, Taiwan was able to maintain a stable economic environment, which was crucial for attracting further investment and promoting sustainable growth. What we've discussed so far was just the foundation of the US-Taiwan economic partnership. Even after the 1970s, the US was still a major partner to Taiwan. While, of course, the aid was slowly phased out as Taiwan eventually became an economic tiger in Asia, the US still, and even until today, has been a crucial part in the military assistance to Taiwan. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.